Well, you mentioned Dayton Hudson, and you joined them in '82 as Vice President of Corporate Relations, and you were with them approximately 14 years, directing PR efforts for many business ventures and crisis situations. First, could you talk a little bit about the problems that arose in 1990 when Dayton Hudson Foundation withdrew funding to Planned Parenthood of Minnesota? Dayton Hudson was always very generous, a very generous community sponsor, and they received a lot of negative publicity about this. How did you handle both the critics and the supporters of this action, and what eventually transpired?
It was the issue of the year, and that's what you have to understand, that it was the year of a gubernatorial election, and a lot of the legislative seats were up for re-election or contested elections, and it was a single issue campaign. You were either pro-choice or pro-life. Planned Parenthood nationally had run a lot of ads, both on the East Coast and all over the country. AT&T had just gone through a shareholder demand that addressed the same things with the AT&T's funding of Planned Parenthood programs. And it was defeated at their annual meeting, but nonetheless it created a lot of attention. So there was a lot of activism going on. Now, Dayton Hudson Foundation was the only part of Dayton Hudson that gave money to Planned Parenthood, and it was because one of the founders of the company's wife was very involved in it. It was a grant in Minnesota for education in the public schools. It had nothing to do with clinics or anything like that. But, and we knew from employee surveys where employees would say, I'm a little uncomfortable, you know, that we're making this grant, or, and so we had decided to do away with to stop making the grant. And we had told them that Dayton Hudson was well known for making exit grants. And so you would say, we are not going to fund you in 3 years, but we are going to give you double funding for the next 3 years, so to tide you over and help you begin to plan what you're going to do without the Dayton Hudson money. When we announced, when it was discovered that we were not going to continue the funding, I was in my office, and I got a phone call from a young man who said, hi, I'm Cope Moyers, as in son of Bill Moyers, and I'm an intern at the Star Tribune in the St. Paul office, and I've just learned that your corporation is pulling its funding from Planned Parenthood, and what do you have to say about that? And I said, can I call you back? I said, you know, I really don't know what to say to you because I'm not aware of this. So I called the foundation people, and they said, oh, we put a copy of that in the mail, in the interoffice mail to you. And I said, oh, we've got some training to do at home. And I think it was because they had done the exit grant that they didn't really rush up and say this might become public. But Cope Moyers very generously gave me a couple of hours to come up with a response. And it was because it fed right into the political climate in Minnesota at the time. It became a really big issue, but a big issue because people were already so polarized about it. So we were caught in the middle on that, and so we decided that the only thing to do, since we were a company that said we listened to our customers, that we should find out. We should convene bring in an impartial person and do some listening to find out what it is that people really were concerned about. So we brought in Jim Shannon, who had headed the General Mills Foundation for a number of years, and he talked to every side of the fence and a lot of people sitting on the fence, and he came forward with a recommendation. So this was one of those where you can't win no matter what you do. Because what the recommendation was and what the foundation decided to do was to continue to support Planned Parenthood of Minnesota, but for a specific separate line item in their budget that dealt with teaching in the schools, providing materials for teaching in the schools about family planning or safe sex or whatever. And so, but nothing to do with the part that was so volatile. At that point in time, we were accused of flip-flopping, and so we received 9,000 cut-up credit cards in the first week. We received the ugliest mail that you can imagine. We had people in tears opening the mail. We responded, but we knew how to respond because we had to respond to every negative letter, and we did. We responded to every cut-up credit card, to everyone who wrote, to everyone who called, and over a period of about 3 weeks. And then we took out an ad in the New York Times and wrote an op-ed piece, and with a point-counterpoint kind of op-ed piece about why companies continue to give to things that may not fit what everyone thinks is the right way to do it. But I remember my CEO saying to me at the time, because Dayton Hudson was a real pioneer in giving, and the originator of 5% clubs all over the nation. And I remember him saying to me, I've had so many phone calls from CEOs saying, is it worth it? Is it worth it to give? And so the op-ed piece sort of addressed that, why it is important to continue to support the communities where you do business. In hindsight, would we have done anything differently? I suppose I'd have had the foundation give me a copy of the memo first, right. But it was, we survived. The company came out of it very strong, and the elections were held in Minnesota, and it was the big issue. So I think it was one of those, retailers always say they want to be on trend. I think we were a little bit too much on trend at that point in time.
Did the op-ed piece really turn the tide for you?
I think it was one of those, I don't know that anything turned the tide. I think that what happens is that you simply have to ride some things out. You're not going to, there is no way. Look at the stories in the papers today, 20 years later. It is still an issue that is a divisive issue, and that part of the social agenda I don't think is going to change till people learn a new language.
Well, let's move into 1987. At that time, you directed all the PR support that really helped defeat an attempted hostile takeover at Dayton Hudson. Now, Arthur Page once said that all business in a democratic society begins with public permission and exists by public approval. Now, I don't know if you actually thought about that statement, but could that statement, did it affect your approach in any decisions? Did you think about any of the Page principles and the kinds of things that Arthur Page stood for at that time when you were going through that takeover? And what was your strategy in working with the corporate lawyers? Because their first instinct would be to probably not say anything or as little as possible to the media, and that would be counter probably to what you would be wanting to do. So how did you handle that?
It was a very interesting time, and I was not yet a member of the Page Society, so I didn't really know about the Page principles. But being aware of the public and behaving like the public was the most important organization or group that your responsibility. That's how we did business all the time. We were a customer-oriented business, and that's why we gave to the communities where we did business. Long before the company was a public company, there was a belief that you had to be sure the communities where you did business were healthy, and so you gave back. And that gave people a reason to shop in your stores, but you listened to customers, you understood what was important to them. So when the day we learned that someone was beginning to accumulate shares of our stock, now this is right after we've been named the best managed corporation in America by the University of Southern California. And the general thought was that the only companies that people went after were companies that were poorly managed or, had some sort of issue to deal with, and that someone thought they could do it better. And so this was quite a surprise. We had another thing going for us, and that was we were a Minnesota incorporated company. Unlike many companies that are all incorporated in Delaware, we were incorporated in the state of Minnesota, so we were governed by Minnesota law. So as we sat down and thought to ourselves, well, about, 60% of our stock changed hands in the course of a couple of weeks' time, and so we knew that there's something going on, and everyone is trying to track the stock, but as always, the most valuable source to us is the media, because they have all these sources, and they would call us and tell us who they had heard it was that was buying our stock. We met as a group. The CEO convened a group of his top advisors, and we brought in our outside advisors, and we looked at all of our options, and we decided that the best option, because we had always been so community-focused, concerned about our employees, concerned about where we did business, was not to do a knee-jerk reaction kind of thing, but to very thoughtfully go to the state of Minnesota and say, let's look at the law. Let's see. We didn't think it was right. The people that were identified as accumulating our stock were green mailers. They were people that would come in and they would say they didn't really have a lot of money, but they could get enough money that they could buy a company, and then they would come in and break it up and sell it off. Or they would convince you to pay them so much for all their shares that they would green mail you into getting rid of them. Well, we didn't like that. That's not how we did business. And so we said, let's look at the laws. If someone has good money and wants to buy this company, then you have some fiduciary duties that you can't ignore. But we don't think it's right that you can come in and break up our company and sell it off. So we decided that's the way we were going to go, and thus began what we referred to as 7 days in June. And it was a 7-day program that started with a visit to the governor, and who famously said on television that when the CEO called and said, I have to meet with you this evening, he said to his wife, have you overcharged at Dayton's? But at that point in time, we drew up ads to run in newspapers statewide. We commissioned a poll of people of Minnesota to find out if they thought that changing the law, strengthening the law to prevent people coming in and busting up companies. We had a slogan that said, I like Dayton-Hudson whole, not halved, because the people coming after us were the halves. And so we launched a 7-day campaign to convince the people of Minnesota that the governor should call a special session and change the law to prevent people from coming in without good money. And so that was what we learned in the survey of people of Minnesota was they all agreed that something should be done. But we had thought it would be because of all the money we'd given or all the contributions we'd made. What we found was the people of Minnesota said, yes, do something for them because they have this wonderful liberal return policy. And they've trusted us all these years. They've never asked for a receipt, or they've just taken it back if we said we bought it there. So, and that was the tipping point that made it safe for the legislators to agree to have a special session. And so that was the program, and it was the most covered story in the United States because we were fighting a hostile takeover threat, because so much stock had traded hands, and because these people were sort of colorful. And they owned Crown Books, which was a discount bookstore, and at the time we owned B. Dalton Bookseller, which was now what you know today as Barnes & Noble. But it was if we could go back and do it over again, there are lots of things we would do over again, and one of them was how to deal with lawyers. Because this is something, in one of our meetings, my CEO said, have any of you ever done this before? And we all said no. We've never been through this kind of thing before. So when you have investment bankers and lawyers and everyone telling you, you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't say this, And we kept saying, but we can respond to the media, we can put out news releases, why can't we communicate with our employees? But corporate lawyers don't like paper. And so they would discourage that. We did a lot of presentations after it was over saying, if we could do this again, what would we do differently? And the number one thing is that we would have communicated more quickly with our own employees. And I think the turning point was the day that the CEO said, just tell the lawyers and the bankers to back off because I'm the captain of this ship. And we're going to start calling the signals here. And it was an incredible experience for a company, the leadership of a company, to go through a threat to the company, not just the way you've always had it, but something you believe in. Now, the interesting thing with the law is that it was the first time that a law was passed that said that a corporation had to pay attention to its communities where it did business and to its employees, and not just to shareholders. So,
let's talk a minute about counseling. I've had other interviews with other Page Society members, and they've expressed some concern over the current state of corporate public relations and the decline in the number of PR counselors to corporate CEOs. It's been noted that individuals who've been indicted in recent waves of corporate scandals, and there have been many of those, have not held PR positions. So does that mean that those of you who held the counseling positions were the ethics police, guiding the upper management towards making correct ethical decisions? Is the trend changing now? Are we getting back into having counselors to CEOs and having the PR person at the policy-making table?
I don't feel quite as discouraged about corporate PR in the last decade as some may have been. I think we have fewer companies today because there have been so many mergers, and so we don't see maybe as many people, and a lot of senior people retired, and functions may have shifted or changed a little bit or been integrated in a different way. But I feel like there's still wonderful, solid corporate public relations practice going on today, and there are still hundreds of people sitting at the table helping CEOs make decisions. So I guess I'm not quite as gloom and doom about that as some may be. Maybe it isn't all being done the way it used to be, but I don't think that's all that bad. I do believe that the role has changed as you would expect it to, because we have more things available to us. I mean, you know, we talk about how the kinds of technology we have available. You know, those of us that started on a manual typewriter and then, you know, thought we had died and gone to heaven when we had a self-correcting selectric, you know, where you didn't have to, you know, or you didn't have to use carbon paper anymore, or things like that. And going from mailing news releases to faxing news releases to the electronic transfer of something, you know, when you're disclosing information. I don't mean that everything is news releases, but for those times when you have to make public announcements, to now just going, you know, on the wire directly. I mean, it's amazing, the speed of information, and I think that has changed a lot of what we do. The being at the table, you know, we used to always say, oh, if we could just get to the table. And I wasn't quite so sure it was all of that glorious at times to be at the table, but the fact is, what you want to be a place where you have the ear of the CEO, and where you can, because it's what you're doing are really the CEO's job. And so, I mean, in terms of public relationships, the reputation of the corporation. And so you become a partner. It isn't just you doing it. I mean, you're the CEO's partner. So I think that our counseling role is still there. It just may not be in the same form that it used to be. But I do feel like like CEOs are still listening a lot. At least the CEOs I know are still paying a lot of attention to what their chief communications officer, chief public relations officer is telling them. Now, when you do have a problem, then I always say to people, pray for a crisis. Because whenever you have a crisis, then everybody says, where are those PR people? Let's bring them in here and let them show what they can do. And that is a time. I mean, it's just not all crises are bad. It's a great time to show what we can do, and to really show how we have as much business sense as anyone else. If we have lost that key to the door, if we've lost that, then I think it's because we haven't paid enough attention to how business is changing, or we've wanted to hold on to an old way of doing something when we needed to move more into a strategic counseling mindset, and not just into tactics or we can solve this by working with the media. There isn't time. By the time the paper comes out or a television program goes on, someone's been yelling on a blog or somewhere they've already changed how people think about a company. So it is it's an exciting time, but I just think it's a kind of a different time for PR people. It doesn't fit the old model.